Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Excel College Podcast. I'm your host today, Isaiah Schmidt, joined by our co-host,
Austin Smith. It's pretty close in last names.
There you go,
Smith.
Schmidt and Smith.
Yeah.
And today we have as a guest, Andrew Haak.
Hello.
What the? No,
Yeah.
A very familiar face.
Returning guest.
Returning guest, yeah. I guess that's the most appropriate way to welcome back.
There we
Also
go.
/ host. You've hosted a couple episodes, but
Have you?
I don't remember. I've sat here, I think, each time, but I don't know. Either way.
We should stop calling people guests that have been on.
it's true. How about just Andrew?
There you
Welcome
go.
back, Andrew.
Thank you.
Student number one.
You said it, folks, not me.
Sorry, Chambers.
So where we're at in the journey of the student journey, where are we at in the so
excuse me.
let's just start the whole thing.
Yeah,
over,
we probably
Yeah.
should. That's
It's fine. We can just
Where we're at in the
I'm a student of life.
Gosh, I wish we had more.
Time.
Well, just people to do like outtakes and bloopers and stuff.
Oh.
That would be so funny.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We would have so many.
for sure.
Anyway,
Okay,
all right.
I'm too excited for our next episode.
Should we do that
Well, think
one
about it.
first?
Think about all the things of beauty we talked about.
I know there's so
God.
much.
Oh, yeah.
Italy. There's
We had
so
a lot
much
of
to
good
pull from.
one-liners where you were like, we
Yeah.
need to get back in there.
Yep.
Yeah.
We can
that
get there. I
space.
guess.
What's one line?
Sweet.
What's
I don't know.
one syllable?
Whose line was it anyways? We don't even know. There we go.
Well, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Excel College Podcast. I'm your host today, Isaiah Schmidt, joined by the co-host,
Austin Smith.
and we're welcoming back our resident expert on all things,
Oh boy.
Resident.
Andrew Haak.
Non-official title. But that is my name, Andrew Haak, so I'll take that.
That is your title.
Yes. Well, resident expert. Anyways.
Resident expert. Anyway, moving on.
It's good to be here. Thanks, man.
Yeah. So where we are in the student journey is we are concluding the core with our final module, the fine arts. We started in critical thinking. We moved on to theology, philosophy, mathematics, the sciences, anthropology, sociology, the social sciences, finished in economics and government. And now we're in this totally different sphere, kind of a category all on its own, literature and the fine arts. It contrasts the other subjects in strange ways. It engages a new part of our mind and our spirit, our soul, It engages a new part of us, maybe the contemplative side of us, whereas before we've really been about understanding these different things.
It's true.
You guys, the two of you, just came back from a trip overseas. Is that
Yeah.
right?
You did.
To Italy.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
It was awesome.
Tell me a little bit about that.
It's hard to sum up in a short. Everybody asked me, and I'm like, I can't.
Yeah.
I can't condense it down. Really.
Yeah.
Except like it was amazing.
In what ways would it contrast with a vacation?
Fair point.
Honestly, I keep telling people like if you're, especially those cities in particular, like Rome and Florence in particular, like I feel like that's the best way to do it, even on a vacation.
Yeah.
Is to take some of those tours. Obviously, we did a lot of tours, but like, yeah, just because the city, like that is the history of the city, a lot of it. So I think even if I was going on vacation to Florence, like I told my sister and brother-in-law, like because they want to possibly live in Italy one day, I was like,
Wow.
you just got to go do the tours because you learn so much about the city. And yeah, so I don't know how different it is via vacation, but
Yeah.
I think it's awesome.
I mean, one of the things that Davis mentioned really beforehand kind of set the stage for all the students is we're going as students, not as tourists. In other words, getting at that there's something to be learned here, not just to be enjoyed and amused at, but there's obviously combinations of the two of those, like to really be a student of art, like that's a part of it. Emotions are one of the most key parts of art and what those lead us to and all that. But yeah, definitely just digging deep in each of those places. There was so much. So starting in Rome, then a day in Assisi, and then in Florence the rest of the time. It was amazing. We were gone, about 3 weeks?
2.5 weeks.
2.5 weeks. And then the airlines, we had
A little trouble getting back.
yeah, there was a strike from transportation that set a few of us back a few days.
Literally the day we were all leaving.
It was unfortunate, but it was still good. I mean, when you're in Italy for a few more days, it's not the worst thing that can happen. So it all worked out. It was good. Yeah.
So students of art, studying beauty, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How does one even begin the study of beauty? What are some of the questions that stood out to you, or just some memorable moments?
Yeah. I would say the most key thing in all of it, because so before the trip, before we left, we really took time to like learn techniques and aspects of reading art. And this revelation really hit me a few different ways, just continually seeing as we went to Italy and saw all of it, that people would read art before they ever read books. Books didn't really get widely dispersed, but art was in the public square and you could read that.
Amazing.
You walk by your cathedral and you can actually see the gospel, or you can see what, I don't know, patron supported it in his statue, or whatever Greek god was there. Like, that's what the people were reading and getting their cultural information from, their history, right? So there's oral traditions for sure. But if you're going to read artwork, permanent things, just as we'd read a book today, things have shifted where now we're usually illiterate at reading art, but we read books. So we've actually lost this capacity over time in general, that we were actually able to go and recover a bit. So just knowing that I can actually read a painting, not just appreciate that it looks pretty or it's kind of fun, or that's pretty weird, or I don't get it, which is oftentimes the things I would say before. Now I at least have a whole tool belt. I can start to inspect and unpack, like, what were they trying to say?
So good.
So it was bizarre. Just getting equipped with that, and then going and looking at masterpieces. The amount of intentionality it takes to make something look like that is insane. So nothing is placed in there by accident. Whereas if you have a camera, or I don't know, something on video, there might be something that's a real representation of reality, not just a symbol. But if you're painting something and there's an apple in the background, that means something, because you didn't have to put it there. It wasn't accidentally in the background when you took the photo. So there's significance and symbol everywhere in the arts that I didn't even have the filter for, let alone the tools.
That's a great point.
So that was exciting as we were building up to it, and then going and looking at it. There's so much to take from it.
It's a great point to say. You just use the word photo, and how much a photo stands in contrast to a painting, and how a photo is a capture of reality, whereas a painting, everything, like you just mentioned, everything that's included in there didn't have to be in there,
Right.
But it was put in there by the artist for some reason, and you have to ask yourself why. That's awesome. Yeah, it's symbolic communication of meaning all over the place. Everything.
Totally.
Yeah.
Right back to the sociology module.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
For sure.
Learning to capture and learning to read meaning out of symbols that artists have left for us to find.
That's good.
So good.
Man.
So good. Yeah. And even like, I know we studied a Monet painting, and not to meta too much, but like afterwards, after we read it all, like not doing any research or looking anything up beforehand, but afterwards when I was looking it up, you can, like, they often take paintings like that and like x-ray them to where you can see the brush strokes and when they happened. And like we were looking at this one Monet, and like you can tell like this was, or from the x-ray they can say like this was the original painting and this was painted afterwards, like several days, weeks, months later.
Wow.
Just because of the dry time, and like paint, artists tend to like paint over things like when they're I don't know. So that was just super interesting to me too, of just like I don't know, they paint their original thing, and then in that meaning, in that what they want to convey, then they'll come back later and say, oh wait, I want to actually do this to provide some extra layer or depth to the story, or that kind of thing. That was super fascinating to me.
Wow.
Yeah.
What were some paintings that you feel like stand out in your memory from the trip?
Oh.
Well, so one of the way the assignments kind of worked is having an assignment to read a specific painting and like document it and go through it. So there's a few that we did. One of them we got to select from the Uffizi Gallery, which is in Florence. It's amazing. Wow. Just to think there were just, I don't know, offices for royalty, and it's just so chock full of art that you can't take it all in. It's kind of overwhelming. Just like, I don't know, just to think that it was a governmental building, and it's just so beautiful and so aimed at just being so chock full of art. It challenges a lot of things that I've seen, and especially when it comes to like the utility of a government building, as even we see, versus the beauty that they were surrounded by. And all that being said, in the Uffizi Gallery, the sacrifice of Isaac. I know, right? We were allowed to choose from any painting out of thousands of paintings.
Dude, yeah.
And then I started doing it and I realized he's doing it too. And I'm like, wait a minute. Like,
I literally am sitting on it, or you were sitting on the bench.
yeah.
And then I came and sat down and I was like, what the?
I was like, what are you doing? So we ended up both reading the
picked the
same,
same one.
by Caravaggio.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm familiar
I
with
love
it.
Caravaggio.
Yeah.
I did my report on it in 2018.
No, you didn't.
I did.
What
The
the?
Sacrifice of Isaac by Caravaggio.
Wait,
All
why?
right.
I'm curious. So
I knew that you did.
Let's
That's
get
why I
somebody
asked
else
the
in.
well, so here's the thing. I'm curious. So like with the piece of art that like just the whole process of reading it. The first thing, and maybe this is a good question because I know I just flipped the script and I'm not asking you a question, but we all read the same painting, and the real question I want to know is why.
Yeah.
But like the first thing that I know that we're instructed as we start this, and this really helped me because you're moving such an analytical way of thinking beforehand in critical thinking to now, like you said, more of a meditative kind of approach.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to shift out of that. So you have to stop. And as soon as you look at the painting, not reading the plaque, and be like, what am I feeling right now? And taking inventory of that. And I feel like that must have been something. And maybe it was the technical ability the artist had. You know, Caravaggio's, I mean, brilliant. But I'm curious, what was the emotion that first like enraptured you guys when you looked at that? I'm curious if it was similar or different. Like, why was it that painting?
Do you remember?
Yeah, I mean, it is the skill for sure. It's also the color, and then I remember the facial expression of Isaac. If you think about just the story of Abraham, like the angel of the Lord shows up last minute and saves Isaac, and so even just as a viewer, also for our listeners, might be helpful just to throw it up on your phone or computer, whatever you're listening on. Yeah, the Sacrifice of Isaac by Caravaggio, amazing painting.
Michelangelo Caravaggio.
Yeah,
Yeah, the other Michelangelo.
The other
but
one.
I just remember because we did a presentation at our final day in Italy when these guys are in a different cohort. They're part of C5, C6. I was a part of C2. So years ago, I went as well, and I was presenting it to my class on the last day there, and I was like, in a way, you feel like this impulse to step in and save Isaac. You feel like you are, in a sense, the one sent from God to stop the thing that like Abraham's doing in faithfulness, and you know how the story ends. He doesn't kill his son, but you still feel this impulse because you see such a helpless figure of Isaac in terror, in total terror. It's striking. Yeah, that's what stands out to me first is the facial expression of Isaac and this impulse to step in and stop the thing that you know actually doesn't please the heart of God. The faithful, like the obedience and faith of Isaac does, but of course the sacrifice of the innocent, not at all, not the father heart. You know.
I think I chose it just because I love the story itself.
Okay.
So I'm a little biased, but also from an art perspective, the diagonal line from the close up and then way in the background you see
Right.
the city and all the detail. Like it was just amazing, but it was just like not an actual line. What are they? Oh, I can't remember what it's called, but
Orthogonals?
or just like there's not physical lines, but it's
Implied. It's an
like
line.
implied lines. Yeah. But just the mountainside is on one portion of it, and then the background, and that was so cool to me. But the way that he, I don't know, just painted like from the close up and the forestry or like the leaves, like made that diagonal line with the angel's arm, as well, which is really cool. But that's kind of what caught me. But I just love the story of that story. Yeah,
That's so interesting.
yeah.
Because for me, like it was like striking because like Caravaggio's work's known for its strong usage of shadows, like dark shadows and really bright lights. And plus it looks like it's so realistic. It's insane. So those two aspects are probably pretty key to his art that started off I can never say the word.
Chiaroscuro. It's an Italian word.
Chiaroscuro?
Yeah.
Chiaroscuro. Okay.
That's my
Yeah.
English
I've
pronunciation.
heard
of-
people relate it to tenebrism, and studying it in only a month, you only get like an introduction to it.
Chiaroscuro or something
So,
like
but
that,
just
yeah.
the strong, can't even say it with the charcuterie. Yeah, charcuterie. No, I'm just kidding. Lost my train of thought. But as I was looking at that, it was really cool because like the different layers of reading the painting, right? There's like, you can look at the colors, you can look at the lines like you did, the emotions. For me, it just that sense of urgency also struck me. But then as I started to read the painting, because it was just something about it I couldn't put my finger on that I really appreciated. So the strength of the emotions made it really easy to read in a way, versus other ones that might be more subtle. Because I don't know, I haven't gotten to the place where I really like much of abstract art or contemporary art. And now I have at least the tools to be able to start reading it and maybe understand why. But as I'm reading it and as I'm looking into it, if you look down in the bottom right-hand corner, there's two things that, well, there's two figures in the background, which is brilliant work of him with his shading, which they say might be the two servants that were left at the bottom of the mountain.
Wow.
But if you look at the character so he's stopping the sacrifice of Isaac. So that's interesting. As he's stopping that happening, there's actually the ram down here in the thicket, but it's not necessarily caught up or anything. The ram actually has its own facial expression. Wow. It almost looks sincere, and it almost looks as though it's looking up and be like, no, I'll do it. Wow. Foreshadowing, get this, it's darker than the rest of the thing. So it's not the main focal point of view, but it's actually this interesting point where why is it so shaded? And to me, I don't know, this is how I was interpreting it, of this foreshadowing of what's to come. The sincere lamb who was slain, like Christ actually, and that sincere look in his face, looking up at him, and the angel's actually pointing above Isaac, over kind of towards where the ram is at. And obviously that's how the story goes, but it's just like the sincerity of Jesus embodied in the painting, but it's only kind of this little shadow of what to come. It wasn't there yet. Wow. It wasn't at that time, but it was just as real. I don't know, like that. It was amazing. I don't know how much of that the artist was actually putting into the painting, as much as he worked with it, it came out of it. Yeah. And I don't know, that's a very mysterious thing to say and very abstract, but the more that I look at it, I wonder, I'm like, did these artists actually have that much of a cognitive revelation that they could communicate in any other format than through their painting? Yeah. Like it was so strong that maybe you had never read a book when Caravaggio was around, but if you saw that painting, you could read that and understand there's something more to this ram that's over here, and making you want to understand the story more.
Yeah.
So it's just, and it's so emotional when you allow it to be, and don't just jump to be like, oh, it's a sacrifice of Isaac and move on, or oh, it's really close to the real thing, because you can see the pores and wrinkles on Abraham's face. Right. Yeah. Like it does have that, but the levels just go so much deeper on the things that they call upon that it just makes it truly beautiful. Wow. So yeah, I know we went on that for a while, but I just found it so striking. That's why I chose to read it too. And
the expression, just to keep going on the expression train, like all these different, the interplay of these expressions, like Abraham represents this like a stoic decision. He made a decision. And there's not a lot of emotion in his face. He's like following through with the thing.
That's my favorite part of the story is like the Lord himself will provide the sacrifice. When Isaac asks him, like, where is the sacrifice? And he said, the Lord himself will provide the sacrifice. Oh, so anyway.
Yeah. That's so awesome.
Good. Wow.
Yeah. Big foreshadowing. Yeah. And even just the depth, like again, for me, like that depth with the non-linear, whatever it's called, I can't remember. Just like kind of conveys that story even more. Cause we saw, I don't know, 3 or 4 different representations of Abraham and Isaac, like the sacrifice of Isaac from different, artists. Yeah. And that one just like conveys the story so well. And even, Isaac's face, like somebody, because in the gallery, the Medusa is also there from Caravaggio, and somebody took a photo of it and then like put it. Was that you? Or I don't remember who it was. Anyway, put it beside Isaac's face in that painting, the Sacrifice of Isaac painting, and it's like the same facial expression as the Medusa. Whoa. Yeah, which is really interesting. Just like that tormented, like kind of. Wow. Disturbed face, and I think that's actually a big focal point. I think in the whole piece, right. But
I think it is the central one.
I mean,
it's the most lit up. Like everything kind of alludes
the brightest
to.
Color.
Mine's more like a secondary of not quite in that time, but that one is
Yeah.
Wow.
So just everything about the way he depicted the story, I think, was the most amazing thing to me. But that depth just even signifies the story even more when they leave the servants and they walk up this mountain. Kind of what you're saying, the stoic, like Abraham's made his decision. Like he walks up this huge mountain, and like the Lord called him to do it. And he said, we will go and we will come back. But
Wow.
anyway,
Yes, he does say that.
he does say we will come
That's
back.
so
Yeah.
good.
So he has like just this amazing faith about him. But I'm more just referencing how much I like the story. But,
No, it's good.
Yeah.
but just the way that Caravaggio painted it, I think just conveys the story the best, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'd commented the lamb that's in the thicket.
Or the ram.
The ram, yeah.
Or
Ram.
oh, of course.
I know.
Ram. Not lamb, excuse me.
But
Thank you. But just this idea, and I love how Caravaggio plays this out, right? And it in the biblical narrative, it is the ram. But how often Jesus is referred to as the lamb. And a lamb is an infant, powerless, defenseless, no strength, like literally defenseless. And a ram is a symbol of authority, adulthood, strength, brute force, power. And I think of like Jesus when he's on the cross and he's like, I could command legions right now. I'm not without power. I'm not without strength, but I am as though a lamb, like choose to not exercise will or strength.
That's good.
And the symbolism of the ram,
right.
whose strength and power and authority is caught up in the thorns and thistles, like in the story of the the sacrifice of Isaac. Like
Yeah.
the ram caught in the symbol of man's like choice to do like good and evil on their own, and like how that captures man and it incapacitates man. How like their own choices playing out is them incapacitated, but it also is them incapacitated is the sacrifice for their freedom.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
But
Yeah.
just
Anyway.
just an unfinished thought. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
there's so much there.
I know.
I think it's cool,
Amazing.
like these biblical stories that we're super familiar with, sacrifice of Isaac. We can read them for our whole lives, and we will.
Right.
And still, there's a new way to look at it, where it's like, oh wow, I read it. Like I just read it recently again, and I was like, that wouldn't have stood out to me if I just hadn't read it recently. Where he's like, we will come back.
We will come back.
We will come back, and how, like you just mentioned, there's all these different depictions of the scene, and for the ancient viewer that didn't have the printing press
Right.
and access to the text themselves, this is all that they had, and almost I don't know what got filled in the blanks. Like their understanding of the story was only as far as the amount of works that they'd seen and the conversations they've had surrounding it, and just the kind of inquisition into the story of Isaac and Abraham that you would get from your experience in the church, but then also your interaction with these paintings. And
Right. Yeah. Even with that, I think of the city of Florence, and the city of Florence had a baptistry before they finished their cathedral, with a beautiful, I'm sure you've seen it, obviously you two have, but the big red dome, Brunelleschi's dome, which is something we also studied, which is an insane piece of architecture,
Crazy.
just how we did that. We climbed to the top of it and everything was awesome.
Yeah.
But the structure and layout, though, of that entire square around it is actually built so that you can actually see the narrative of the believer as they understood it. So the baptistry is at the front, and every child was actually required to be baptized in that baptistry. I don't know what I was going to call it, baptizing street. No, but they all went through there every year, and that's how you were like officially counted every year as like each family. So it must have been a crazy day, man. How many people would have been there? I mean, all the babies born that year. So anyways, they go through that. But then those doors, you go in the doors, they have special stories on each of the doors. And then going out of those doors, you then face the church, which you are now becoming a part of. And the artwork actually tells the story for you. And on the other side of the church, they had what they called the gates of paradise. And just like, as you're going through it all, it's like the placement of the architecture, the placement of the art, the sculpture, the engravings on the doors themselves, everything. Like I just didn't have a lens for this, the significance of it and what that meant. That people didn't have books to go and read. They didn't have obviously some device to go look it up. What did it mean? It was always there every single day, and they were putting it up. And they were erecting these monuments of like, look at this symbolism. This is what you're called to do. And I don't know. There's a lot of narrative that's involved there as to who is doing it and what the church looked like at the time, and everything wasn't great. But it's just their usage of artwork. I think there's a whole storyline, a whole message being shared that we often lose today in the arts, and it's very watered down in a way. But for them, it was a very rich time that people were just investing large amounts of money in just the most beautiful artworks. And the very location of where those pieces of art were communicated a message in itself, let alone the art, let alone the person who's capturing a story that captures the images, the memories, the stories they would have heard since they were a kid. As soon as you see that statue of David, you're like, whoa, like David was jacked, you know, like, I don't know, like, but maybe you heard the stories about the little shepherd boy, but then they see the statue of him and that's their perception of it, you know, whether accurate or not, it was pulling on something and it embodied and symbolized more than what the art would have been in just a story form, which kind of pulls on the literature side that when we get into these aesthetics that you can engage the senses in a way that if you do it by the technical, skills, if you use technical skills to really express something well, especially something representational, like you can look at it in your daily life and then they made a copy of it in a painting. You're like, well, that looks good or that doesn't. Anyone can say it, you know? So when you have that, it's just, I know that the caliber of the artist has to be high because everyone knows. But then from there, it takes you deeper into the deeper levels of beauty and what that means. So, yeah.
Anyway, one thing that was really impactful for me, just seeing even from like in Rome, like St. Peter's Basilica and all that, like how like that was one of my favorites, like just how amazing and how huge it was, how ornate it was, like, and all these different cathedrals and just buildings, like just how ornate and beautiful they were. The thing about the Duomo in Florence, like from the baptismal, when you walk across, like you were saying, like it's this whole picture of like your walk, I guess, as a believer, like you get baptized and then you walk across this like journey towards the paradise doors. And then you walk in and the whole inside of, I guess, St. Mary's Cathedral, right? Is that what it is?
It's St. Mary of the Lily or something. Oh man, I should probably look it up.
Yeah,
Either way.
But the whole inside is just kind of plain. Like it's not ornate. And when we were on our guided tour, the tour guide was telling us like they did that on purpose because they wanted like the people in the building to be the point, like what you're looking at and what you're interacting with, which I thought was amazing. Like obviously the dome itself, like Brunelleschi's dome is painted and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Amazing story on the dome, but that's the only thing that's really like that has much art to it at all. But I just love that point of like actually know the people, you know, and it was just such a contrast to every other building that we walked in.
Definitely,
you know,
even the outside of the
really
building.
Cool. Yeah, and that was just a facade.
Yeah,
like when because Florence was the capital of Italy for like I don't know 5 years or something. And whenever Florence became the capital, then they put that facade on it because it was also a pretty plain building before that, like marble, just amazing.
Yeah, and different than the country of Italy, which they explained a little bit. I mean, which is very young, as we know Italy today, because it's been multiple, like divided up numerous ways, and post like World War, it's been Italy as we know it. So when we reference it, we're just that's when they're the capital. Boot. Yeah, the boot. We mean the boot. We're Americans. I mean, we don't have enough time to go into geography in the podcast, right? But
anyway, that was one of my favorite things.
That's awesome.
It's just like the plainness of the inside because the people are the point. That was my big takeaway from that.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mentioned this in a previous podcast on the literature one, but we talked about we had Cassidy Solis on, and we just mentioned this idea of 3 different things you can do with an idea or a thing. Like you can understand it, you can use it, and then the third category, this is all an idea, proposed by a guy named Roger Scruton. He's saying that the third thing is you can contemplate it, which it's almost in a field all on its own. It's not about understanding it necessarily. It's not a scientific approach or a logical approach or a dissecting or explaining away approach. And it's not a utility approach of like, what can this do for me, or what can this make me, or how can this make my life easier or solve problems, any of those things. It's a contemplation approach where it's like, what do I get away from it? What's the end of contemplation? It's an encounter with beauty, which I think is one of the most amazing things about the podcast is it enriches that part of our soul that has an appetite for it. And by the way, we're hungry for the thing we're eating.
Right.
And if we've been starved of encounters with true beauty for a while, that's not our fault,
Right.
But once you awaken to this thing, it's like you need more, you want more, because we're built to encounter beauty, and we're built for beauty.
Totally.
And I think the module is brilliant in the way that it introduces us. And I know there's a reading we even do by Pete Lackey that kind of teaches us how to engage with these different levels of beauty and different levels of the arts. I know that was something you were talking about before the podcast.
Yeah.
It's like, so it's a great takeaway from the module for me. I know it is for many students.
I think we should actually camp there.
Yeah,
As far
I can
as-
read them off. I have them here if you
Well,
want.
because of the, like, we've just been talking about Italy, but like,
Yeah.
but like actually the contemplation is I think the biggest thing as far as even the whole core goes, like, cause you're analyzing, but you're also like, just from critical thinking on, like the lit and the art module is kind of where you kind of stop in the same train that you've been going in for a while.
Yeah.
And then you actually like step back and start considering and contemplating.
Yeah.
And I think that is huge and so appropriate and amazing for the end of the core. Honestly, just the whole flow is amazing. But that is the whole thing to me is like, okay, let's step back and actually like, that is reading art is a lot of it is contemplation, where you just let your emotions take over you, where you don't read anything about it, you don't research it, like you just actually look and let it consume you and contemplate it for a while. Like that was my favorite part is like where we would go, like we saw the Moses, or like just as an example, Michelangelo's the Moses, and we were there for an hour and a half just reading this sculpture.
Yeah.
Well, three sculptures on this wall of many sculptures, but but the Moses in particular, we were there for an hour and a half and just journaling and reading and like, even Davis was telling us like, don't go read, the plaque in the front, like actually let it consume you and like contemplate it. And I think Pete's like the seven, the ladder was really helpful because you can read it from this surfacey level, but then there's so many ways that you can dive in deeper.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to mention that.
No, it's so good. I mean, just sitting there and allowing the emotions to be the initial thing, not necessarily my evaluation, critique, even any of that.
Yeah.
Any of that get in the way. And sometimes when you're dealing with claims just consistently, and you're trying to filter them out for what's good, what's not, what's good, what's not, what's wise, what's not, what's very helpful, what's very useful, what's almost there but not quite. You're just constantly in that state of mind. And I really love where the art comes in here, and it just allows it to be like, is it a part of you? And there's like some habits of critical thinking that are in there that are really helpful. And then now is the time to hit a moment of pause and hold in significance just that experience, which really, I don't know, it might feel, dangerous. It might feel, oh man, but it comes to this place of security. I think when it comes to our relationship with God, of all of this time of just going to Him for truth, taking time to really evaluate and listen, then now is a time where we can actually take something and be like, all right, it's the most like real life, because people aren't usually going to flesh out their claims maybe as academically as some people who maybe originally thought of some of these ideas or put them together in the form that we now read them when we're reading some of the classics. But it's like everyday life is going to probably look the most like this artwork, where we're going to be hit with an emotion first, and then we have to know what to do with that. And pointing back to the anthropology module, even like as mankind, we're encountering God's handiwork. We're encountering His art every day. And it's this living artwork that continual life's coming off of, and it's just different. And there's so many things to it. It's what makes up life and all of society and art and government. And it just explodes this kaleidoscope of colors to be able to see it. So just even taking this and looking at like, all right, I could even use this in my relationships, even when I'm sitting out in nature and inspecting a single leaf. So you don't have to be in an art gallery to actually practice this or look for these layers. It can be in your relationships. But if you do have a piece of artwork, it's worth looking into, especially ones where there's the artist's intention is, well, we'll get to that in a minute. But either way. So So with that, one of our readings really dove in. The first layer that everyone usually encounters is, he calls it sensually, or like the five senses, where it usually has more to do with the technique. So you're looking at the colors, the shading, what really stands out first. And then it gets down to emotions, right? Sometimes it's pretty quick, the transition. You can feel something. And you have to stop and be like, okay, what is it I'm feeling? Not necessarily asking why am I feeling it yet. It's what am I feeling? And identifying that's important. And then carrying that through and be like, is that what he was trying to do, or is this what happened? So as you continue to read, he said it gets down to the next level, which is phantasmally. There's a bonus word for you. You can, but basically he says a fancy sparked, like a memory, something like aroused up within you, this thing, this idea. Wow. And then from there, even more so into conceptually, like these grander ideas, rather than just your own experiences. So conceptually, and then down to volitionally, down to even in the ideas of like force explored, like means and ends and whatnot. Wow. So if you're studying a painting of battle, or I know some artist's rendition of War is Kind, maybe refer back to the last podcast. So then it gets down past all these things, right? So these deep emotions, these ideas, these things, all the way to morally. Wow. So when it comes to ideas about like justice or purity or like love, I'm trying to remember faith, hope, and love. That's what it was. And a lot of the paintings, even in Florence, it's interesting. Sometimes they're trying to collaborate two ideas of like ancient mythologies with things like faith, hope, and love, and you see them coming together in the painting of like Venus and springtime. Right. And I'm trying to remember the Primavera, I think it was. It's in the Uffizi, very famous painting. But it's interesting, things like that. If you see three women in classical Renaissance art, it's often faith, hope, and love embodied. No way. Yeah. Right. And the greatest of these is love. No, I mean, it is true scripturally, but it's interesting, some of the symbolism that they're tying to these other ideas, and it's like, why are they putting it there? What does it have to communicate about that? So those morals being represented, maybe like the blind lady of justice with her eyes wrapped and holding out the scales, right? Yeah. So that's getting kind of at the moral side of it. But then it goes even one layer deeper, which is spiritually. And he's talking about faith being expressed with like holiness or grace. But really what it does is it actually ties you back to the very first module with theology, not critical thinking, but theology, where it ties you into this element of reality. That if reality is really based on the character of who God is, then how is that expressed in our artwork? Is that true? Is it actually embodied how it is? So there's so many layers of depth as you look through this thing that something might be technically spot on, like your senses are just alive, the color's the right spot, it's just whoa, and then it gets down there into not only the emotions but like memories and ideas. And I think that's where a lot of people stop. It might end up being a screensaver at best, because it reminds you of that one thing you saw once. But or sometimes nostalgia. You don't get all the way down. Or nostalgia. Yeah. Great point. So going. So those are the layers. Those are the layers. And honestly, it's like, how can we search for that in art, even if the artist didn't try to communicate it, which is kind of what I was trying to hold off from in like modern art. Awesome. If the artist is trying to communicate that there's no meaning, then that is also a message in and of itself. There's actually something he's using to convey that actual idea. Yeah. So it's one of those things where we have to look at it where actually you can find that spiritual depth in it, but is it actually accurate? Is it wise? Is it helpful? Is it good? Does it actually embody reality as we understand him or it? You know what I mean? Yeah. So really, if you haven't gone back to the earlier podcast where we talk about it in theology, I would highly encourage that. But ultimately, it's how do we view reality itself? And our artwork says a lot about how we see it. So
the picture of Dorian Gray is a good case in point.
Oh, from the...
Yeah. Or you were just saying, if you're trying to communicate that life is meaningless, and I don't know if that's ever necessarily explicitly set out to do, but it's more so if your persuasion is that life is meaningless, you're going to create from that persuasion. And like we do create from the persuasion that we have.
Oh yeah.
which is like we're gonna recreate after our own image.
Wow.
Whatever's on the inside will come outside.
Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth, the paintbrush, the typing computer, everything.
Yeah.
It speaks. It speaks.
Yeah.
So how much more important could it be to change our minds and adopt a faith-filled, hope-filled, optimistic view of the future to create good art that's full of meaning, chock full of meaning.
Wow.
Dude.
Yeah,
Totally.
because the artist is extremely responsible for what he creates.
Absolutely.
And the influence, and then that's why I mentioned Dorian Gray. It's a book about influence. The influence that is born out of his artwork, he's not even aware of. There's postmodern artists, Marcel Duchamp being one of them. He created the urinal, the urinal, Armut urinal. It's interesting. 1917 or something like that. He created this piece. I did a report on it in high school and didn't think much of it until I started to go through the critical thinking module and see assumptions and implications and all the things.
See him everywhere now.
I'm like, he literally created kind of this, a postmodern movement in the arts, and the arts kind of influence culture eventually. And it's just this thing that like, there's no point to art. It's just to send a message or to make a point or to, maybe inspire social change or any of these things. Versus if you rewind the clock 150 years and you ask anyone what's the point to art, they're going to say the same thing every single time. Beauty. Beauty's the point. Beauty's the point. Beauty's the point.
Yeah.
The transcendent, that art can actually open up a window into something beyond, is the point, And now it's like, what's the point of art? Well, the point of art is, you can make a living doing it. And it's like, not what? Only today would we think that. Or you can spark social change with art.
Right.
And it's like, that's actually not the point. You're looking at art through a useful lens and not through a beauty lens. Or you can like do all sorts of things with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, you should check out that sculpture, Armut by Marcel Duchamp. He did this, he just took a urinal, 1917, wrote Armut on it and put it in a museum. And it broke headlines. I mean, it's news.
Wow.
And it's this satire piece. He's criticizing the art world and the snobbish art world that thinks this is beautiful and this isn't beautiful. Who's to say beauty is this and not this? What if art actually isn't this snobbish thing, but that's actually just a house of cards that we've built?
Wow.
And what if it's just to make money and like all these things? So he's providing a critique, but he's responsible for the waves that have gone out from his Armut piece, like, and people just like losing track of what the purpose of art is to begin with. Wow. And it's been lost. It's no longer about beauty and an encounter with the transcendent. It's just about, we've turned it into so many different things.
Dude, totally. I mean, it just shows like how utilitarian we are actually becoming.
Yep.
And I think art, like when you really look at it, even just one layer down, it actually challenges that utility function.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of my favorite things, like going back to like contemplation of like just sitting and staring at something, letting the emotions hit you. Like it just challenges that utilitarian mindset because it's like, is this useful for me to be standing in this building for an hour and a half looking at this one sculpture? Probably not.
Yeah.
But like the transcendent factor of like, wow, this is actually beautiful in a way,
Yeah.
I don't know.
And even understanding, like, I don't know, a lot of those artists, if you look up their history, are like, oh wow, there's not exactly the most moral people making art. And then it's like, is there such thing as moral or immoral art? And it just, we didn't dive into that as much as like a debate, as much as there was some things about like off-putting art or things that are ugly. But ultimately, it's really, when you look at it through these layers, you can start to understand that while maybe an artist had incredible use of their, technical ability to put things exactly how they were, to get the shadings in a way that communicated something brilliantly, that doesn't necessarily mean that as you get down there in the spiritual, that, our understanding of, Venus and Mary are the same. And you might see the two associated there because they're pulling on their myth from somewhere else. And it might actually be something that's actually not as helpful, but there's elements to it that can communicate something to like actually transcend what the artist was trying to do and actually be able to take in at these different levels for what it is. You can actually take it and use something. So it can actually be beautiful at each of those levels. And later on, it's not, I guess.
Right.
So,
Totally.
but the art that is overall, all of those tied together, actually beautiful. I mean, isn't that mankind? Or it could be. It can be. And I think that's it. It's like the true artist and creator, God himself, gave us this piece of his characteristic, which we've been playing out since anthropology.
Right.
So we can do it together, a society. We can legalize not to do this, do that, protect certain things, but ultimately it's all being built up to where we've taken care of all of our needed utilities of survival. Now what? In education, what are we going to do? Well, why don't we just see what all the artists do, and maybe there's only 5 of them and all of us just watch TV for hours on it. You know what I mean? Like sometimes it's hard, and we become, consistently in an area of consuming cheap art. And I think at our own expense, rather than also learning just how important it is to create, let alone be able to read things in their richness and meaning. So, and I think honestly that hunger's in everybody. I really do. So it's not a slap at anybody as much as it's like a slap, wake up, of just like, look, there's beautiful stuff all around us. And I honestly think that's why there's a huge movement for people wanting to spend time in nature. It's really deep connection with the original artist himself.
Yeah.
I mean,
God's works.
Part of our I don't know, our art pulls on 2 things that, and I'll say that, but that being able to honor, like really the 2 greatest commandments is directly tied to art. And I remember Pete talking about it some as well, where it's like, ultimately it's how we can take beautiful things from the creator and honor him back. Right. And it's not just worship music. It's just beautiful things in general. Right.
Yeah.
Because we're his children. And can he get hijacked? Sure. But what I'm saying is that's a huge way to fulfill that commandment, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, as an artist, and loving your neighbor as yourself in the same way. So I just think there's so much within art that we actually live out the fullest expression of who we are made to be. So
That's awesome. That's super good.
yeah.
There's so much to go over.
I know. There's so much.
We might just
This
have to
podcast will be 3 hours long.
do a Fine Arts Part 2.
Right.
I feel like that wouldn't be a tough pitch.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But
I do have some suggestions if anyone wants to try out reading some art
let's
here at
go.
the end.
Call to
All right.
action.
So with that being said, all of us as students had to create our own templates. And I made one here is what you see me holding. But we went over a lot of different stuff. I won't go into the specific details. I guess you have to come to Excel College and do the core yourself if you want to get that. Little plug. Yeah. If you want it, you gotta come get it. No.
Yep.
Okay. So some recap of some basic things that are really helpful when first learning how to read a painting. And for me, I only have about a month and a half of experience on this one, so it really helped me out at the start. So when you first see a painting, take your time and use your imagination. Allow like that first initial layer to just be taken in. And seen. So when you're doing that, know where you're looking. Understand where your gaze starts, pauses, and how it searches through the painting. Is it quick little back and forth all over the place? Is it this slow, methodical, continuous thing that always leads back to one place? Always asking the question, is that significant? Why would the artist want me to do that? Then from there, look at the painting from different angles to see if there's any maybe textures used or any things that get longer or shorter. Sometimes if the painting was made to be in a corner, the arm might be a bit longer, like in one of Da Vinci's painting, and they thought he made a mistake. But then they realized the painting was actually supposed to be seen from the side. So the arm actually was the perfect length when you looked at it from the side. It's brilliant.
Dude, so many things, yeah.
So location of the painting and the angle, totally connected. And then read the painting before you read the plaque, whatever you do. Like thoroughly read it. Get the most out of it. Feel what you feel. Understand as best you can what you see. Then read it. And then ask yourself the question, how might the two be connected? Also a fun fact, most plaques were actually not most paintings were not given a name by the artist in that time period. It's a rarity. That was later. Curators at museums and other people throughout time have named the paintings after the fact. Yeah, I was blown away when I heard that from one of our instructors. Yeah. So know that reading the painting before the plaque, it's more true to what the artist was conveying than the plaque, because they maybe didn't even name the painting. So, and then afterwards, does the plaque anything new? And then craft a question to ask afterwards that you're left with. Remain curious about the painting as you contemplate it. And only after all of that, maybe pull it up on the internet to see what other people are thinking. Because if it's an old classical work you're reading, then it's likely that the artist has nothing out there except for the painting to speak for itself.
Right. Wow. Right.
So keep all those things in mind when you look at a painting. And if you're looking at modern artwork, know that if it seems meaningless, maybe that's the message you're trying to come across with. But I would encourage you to continue to dig. Because it might not be entirely meaningless,
right?
And there might be something to learn there. So,
that's
pro tips on reading a painting.
Yeah, that's helpful, man.
Yeah.
And the final step, post in the comments.
Post in the comments what you got. No, I would love to hear
painting
that.
you unpacked and maybe some observations.
Oh, I'd love
I thought
that.
those prompts were great, Andrew.
Yeah. Thank you.
We'd love to engage with our online community. Yeah,
absolutely.
If you thought that was a fun challenge, there's a ton of great YouTube videos out there actually that kind of just are people who would analyze and break down paintings that like maybe they might have a more developed lens than I do.
Totally.
Because they've spent their lives looking at these paintings and they might help me catch things that I might have missed. So there's a lot of great
yourself first.
Yep, read it yourself first.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. But with that, I think we'll probably wrap up this episode.
Yeah.
Thanks to our listeners for sticking around this long.
Yeah.
If you're watching us on YouTube, then that's amazing. But if you're not, be aware that we post these on YouTube as well, full length, as well as on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And most of these are linked to our Instagram at theexcelcollege.com Instagram. So we hope to hear you in the next, we hope to hear from you, I suppose, in our comment section, but we more so hope that you hear from us in the next episode. And we'll see you then.
Absolutely. Take care.
Bye.